Good to go.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education, Friday, March 31st, 1:33. A little bit of a late start, a few minutes. We don't have too heavy of an agenda this afternoon. We have not yet received it, but I know the House has sent us an independent school bill. So we are going to hear from Emily Simmons. Ms. Simmons, I know have been on the agenda for a while now, and I, just because of schedules, floor schedules, we're then going to have Mr. Fisher in to talk about a letter that we received on school mascots, then we'll look at miscellaneous education, and then Senator Gulick has a colleague,
Yeah.
Who's going to zoom in and talk to us a little bit about PCB testing. And then hopefully we'll be on the road. So with that, Ms. Simmons, we received this testimony a while ago, I believe, initially. This is the Agency of Education Testimony Independent School Approval. Is that what we're looking at?
Yes, that's the heading, and it's got today's date on it.
Okay, and I know prior to the secretary's resignation, he was going to come in, and I think this testimony mirrors what he also submitted. Is that accurate?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, so this is a different position, or tell me a little bit about your understanding of why you're here, and then we'll say whether or not we think that's accurate.
Sure, and please kick me right out if I've come with the wrong information, and I'll identify myself now. Emily Simmons, General Counsel for the Agency of Education. I've brought a background briefing, is how I would characterize it, on the framework of independent schools in Vermont. It's highly technical and doesn't contain a position on any particular legislation.
Okay. There was, I think this is fine, since the secretary is, things are in transition there. Why don't we jump into this? You can tell us a little bit. I'm sure it's going to inform our future discussions in the coming weeks. So with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry, this is seemingly dry material. Maybe we can find some nuggets that are interesting and I can answer some questions that come up. But I was motivated to organize the information in this particular way because I think the committee's knowledgeable about the state's framework for independent schools. What's not come up as much is the way the laws are organized and where the different, maybe generally known facts are included in the laws and how that might implicate some of the decisions that come up for you. If I could just get these things in the back of your mind as you do receive a bill on these topics, I will have accomplished my goal.
And this isn't your responsibility, but you know where the bill is?
I was wanting to read a complete version of the House bill just for my own knowledge and answering your questions today. And I don't see that posted on the website yet. So I believe Legislative Council will be working on incorporating the amendments that passed.
Okay, so it has passed the House. They are going to get us something.
I see that it passed third reading in the calendar.
Thank you.
So I'll start just at the top of my memo. So to zoom way out from maybe any conversations that you've had, I'll just start at the level of there are independent schools in Vermont. These are generally what would be called private schools in state and more commonly in other states. The sources of law, as I hinted, for our independent schools in Vermont are not organized into one single location. So I was going to walk through those places and the nuances of each type of independent school. So we start with the definition section of Title 16, which is Section 11. Some of the definitions that are pertinent there are the general definition of independent school, which is a school other than a public school providing a program of elementary or secondary education or both. So just the very basic foundation. Then you get a definition for approved independent school meeting education quality standards. I can tell you this is the smallest category of independent school in Vermont. We have anywhere from 1 to 2 of these schools, depending on the year. There's been some fluctuation in that category. But these approved independent schools that meet education quality standards have undergone the education quality standards process and meet the requirements of the education quality standards, and those are found in section 165, Title 16. The education quality standards are generally for school districts, but an independent school can voluntarily meet those and achieve this status. Then you have approved independent schools. Those are independent schools that, pursuant to the process in section 166B, have been given the title of approved. And then finally, we have recognized independent schools, which are those that meet definitions or requirements in 166C. That's not a home study program. So why all the complication with the names? And it's really because of our compulsory attendance law, at least in my point of view. So Vermont's compulsory attendance law requires that children between the ages of 6 and 16 must attend a public school, an approved or recognized independent school, or an approved education program, or be enrolled in home study. So there are those defined locations or types of education that satisfy compulsory attendance. Otherwise, a student would be considered truant. So the label given by the state to a private education program is significant in order to make that connection and make sure that a student is in a place that satisfies compulsory attendance and avoids truancy. So the definitions send us in many places to section 166 in Title 16. You'll see in that section that status as an approved independent school comes from the State Board of Education based on the school meeting several requirements. Those are essentially providing a minimum course of study, substantially complying with all statutory requirements, and substantially complying with the state board's rules for approval of independent schools. Also in section 166, but in a different subsection, you have status as a recognized independent school, which is granted after filing what's called an enrollment notice with the AOE. The enrollment notice contains information and assurances also regarding the minimum course of study, the school's academic calendar, the maintenance of its attendance records and assessment, and the school's compliance with safety considerations and the statutes. I put a link in my testimony to that enrollment notice form. The process is basically that the school fills out that form, submits it to the agency. If the information is complete, the school is listed as a recognized independent school. So leaving section 166, the kind of final piece of the puzzle, at least as far as the statutes are concerned, are the tuition payment statutes. So that's going to be located in section 821 as regards elementary grades and 822 for grades 7 through 12. This is where we have the concepts that establish an approved independent school can receive publicly funded tuition from a school district that pays tuition rather than operating a school for one or more grades. The statutes do not grant authority to pay tuition to a recognized independent school. So you won't find a affirmative statement that you shall not pay tuition, but the way the statutes are worded, you're only permitted to pay tuition to a public or approved independent school. Here's where I wanted to highlight a complicating factor. I feel like everything I've said to date is complicated, but further complicating the nomenclature for independent schools is that Act 173 in 2018 created the important distinction among approved independent schools. So further subdividing that category of approved independent schools. As of this July 1st, schools that intend to accept public tuition, that is to say those schools that enroll students from tuition-paying school districts, must complete additional approval steps established in state board rules. Those additional steps are ensured designed to ensure that students who receive special education services can attend the school of the student's choice. So we've added these additional protections that are required for schools that intend to accept public tuition. However, the Act still retained the broader category of approved independent school, including those that do not intend to accept public tuition and therefore do not meet the newer requirements enrolling students who receive special education services. So that leaves us with two categories of approved independent school and just a clunky mouthful of nomenclature, if nothing else. So we have approved independent schools and approved independent schools that are ineligible to receive public funds. That's the approach the state board rules took in the definition section. So that was a motivation to have the more common term have fewer words in it, and the less common term that the state would deal with less be longer. So the ineligible framing, you could take the opposite approach and have approved independent schools eligible to receive public funds, and then just regular old approved independent schools. You wouldn't think it, but it's a huge burden in government to have these confusing and lengthy terms when you think about the fact that we have to create guidance documents and make sure that the public is educated and school boards are educated about these terms. So I think that was unforeseen in Act 173 that this would become a terminology issue. So then moving on to the Agency of Education specific responsibilities for approved independent schools. These come in the State Board of Education Rule Series 2200. Those rules were updated last May 2022. Some of the rules became effective upon adoption, so on May 10th of last year, and some rules become effective because of the legislation on July 1, 2023, so this summer. But overall, these rules delegate responsibilities for oversight of the approval process of independent schools and the assurance of compliance with the rules to the Agency of Education. So some specific rules that have either been updated or of interest. You have Rule 2223, which requires the agency to maintain an application for independent school approval, and then to appoint a review committee to review each received application. The review committee is made up of agency employees. The review committee makes a site visit to each applicant's school and then writes a report of its findings of the application and the site visit. The committee's report and recommendation is reviewed by the secretary, becomes the secretary's recommendation, and is sent to the State Board of Education for action, and they either grant approval or not based on their opinion of the report and recommendation. The entire process from application to State Board meeting takes about 6 to 8 months. It is conducted both for initial approvals for new schools or schools that have never been approved before, and for renewal of approval, which occurs on a cycle of 2 to 5 years per school.
We have a question, and just so you know, Ms. Simmons, although this is a very helpful review, we have had this. We had Ledge Council take us through it, so it's not exactly what we were looking for, more the administration's position and sort of, I think, we'll get into that. It's not a bad review, but and again, I recognize that they haven't even, their bill hasn't made its way. But Senator Gulick has a question.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. I was just wondering, for those of us who are new to this committee, could you please give us 2 examples of approved independent schools and then 2 examples of approved independent schools ineligible to receive public funds?
Sure, I can explain that further. I can't give you any real life examples of approved schools approved to receive public funds because that provision of the rules and that provision of Act 173 of 2018 has an effective date of July 1, 2023. So it's still an upcoming process for us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think it will be any surprise that, for instance, we expect our academies, our large for academy schools to apply to have the status of approved independent school eligible to receive public funds. I won't name one, but there may be a smaller independent school that has fewer, just because maybe it's geography, very few or no students who attend on public tuition. Maybe it's a school in Chittenden County where no nearby school districts pay tuition, and so students aren't driving in commonly. They might elect to be just an approved independent school or an independent school ineligible to receive public funds. They would still go through a process, an application, a site review to receive that status. It just wouldn't be as comprehensive as the eligible to receive public funds process.
Senator Weeks.
Ms. Simmons, thank you. Just curiosity, so when you're describing on the second page, the additional approval steps established by the State Board of Education, does that relate back to is that the equity program declaration and maybe some other requirements? Is that, okay.
I think we're talking about the same thing. So some of those requirements are to assure that the school complies with the Public Accommodations Act. Maybe lesser talked about requirement is to comply with new rule 2229, which has to do with the school's process for admissions, to ensure that the admissions process is non-discriminatory, fair.
Okay, thank you.
So now, knowing that you have already received this information, I'm sorry.
It's a good review, frankly. It's a good review because, we're going to be jumping back into this. This St. James came in, was a few weeks ago to kind of take us through the various differences, but clearly people still have questions. So it's good that you're here.
And I am talking now on the last page about some rules that are new. So I don't believe you've looked at the administrative rules directly, and there's a lot of change there. So pointing you to, again, State Board Rule 2223. This is a new process that requires the agency to take steps to conduct investigations of complaints that an independent school is failing to meet approval standards or to comply with laws and rules applicable to independent schools, so breaking the rules. The agency's investigation might ultimately result in a hearing before the state board where approval is withdrawn from the school or conditioned. The secretary also has new authority in the rule to place a school on probation, which is a publicly known designation. The ability to place a school on probation was added in May 2022. So far this year, no school has been placed on probation. It's a new rule. We'll see where that goes. And then my final point to you is that I haven't laid out any of the considerations for what we call therapeutic independent schools that I know you're familiar with. That's a whole other set of complex rules and statutes, particularly around the rate setting that the agency does for those schools. But I can come back another day because I don't think you're receiving a bill that will directly implicate these types of schools. They're generally excluded from what I've seen of the House bill.
Would an example, are those all out of state or somewhere? For example, is the Compass School, does that fall into that category or no? Okay.
Therapeutic schools would be ones you're familiar with, the Vermont School for Girls.
Yes.
School for Girls, the Howard Center programs, Jean Garvin School. Those are just some that I can come up with off the top of my head. They're generally very small, and they the main difference between the non-therapeutic schools is that school districts that operate all grades still pay tuition for their students who need those services to attend therapeutic independent schools because of special education needs. So that's not a population of students who have necessarily used school choice to select where they'll attend. It's a placement.
That's good to know. Very helpful. Anything else, Ms. Simmons?
I've included a link to the current approved and recognized independent schools directory. So that's where you can find the complete list by category of every school in Vermont that is either approved or recognized. And you can find the information about student enrollment, number of students who attend, and grade levels.
And I'm looking now at Secretary French's March 2nd, 2023 submitted testimony that we're not able to hear. So can you just loop back to your the perhaps secretary or interim secretary, and I guess simply be prepared to come in next week once we receive the House bill on independent schools, and just be ready to weigh in on it. And if you would email Hayden, that would be great.
Of course, when you receive that bill, we're gonna come in and get you what you need.
Great.
I'm sorry, I saw the title and made an assumption about what you needed for today.
There's no problem at all. Other questions? Senator Bueller? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Simmons.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Okay, we're just waiting for Ted to arrive. Is he zooming in? No. Okay.
Yeah, I
You
just
want
said we're wrapping up.
to- Yeah, we can go off.